So, okay. For the people that just joined, well, my name is Francisco Gonzalez. I work in GICAS. I'm a Chilean artist and writer a little bit now. And this is the first activity of the new art department of GICAS. And as Helen was saying, it's like we are trying to build space to be the more critical that we can in relation to the state of art today, the art practices, the relation with capitalism, with the market, and all the problematic things that happen in art and the art world. So we really want to open this space to like honest and open discussion and at the most critical that we can in terms that we don't want to be restricted because we don't own anything to an institution or we don't have specific alliance with something in the art world. So we really want to promote that perspective. And the first seminar is with Eduardo Cruces, artist and also writer and research from Chile, really good friends from a lot of years now. We work together in GICAS LA and Latin America and other projects. And he's now actually one of the coordinators of the GICAS LA node. So yeah, that's the introduction. I don't know, Helen, if you want to add something before Eduardo or
sounds good. I mean, also we're kind of it's very informal. We're just seeing where we go. We're seeing, who turns up, what kind of people, what kind of ideas we can exchange, and we kind of build something as we go. And yeah, so thanks so much to Eduardo for jumping on as the first contributor. Really excited.
Thank you so much for the invitation, and I think it's always nice to celebrate when a new project just start to, I don't know, propose conversations and talkings, especially around art. Thank you so much I will just read quickly the names: Davinder, Cara, Ursula, and Laurie, Jonathan. Thank you so much for being here. Today I will share a presentation. Will take around 20 minutes, and then the idea is just to open the discussion. When Pancho and Helen invite me, they actually, I really like the idea to really build this kind of platform in order to, I don't know, exchange experience around our research, but also in my case, also was an invitation to thinking myself as an artist, because usually the topics in my research is something related to sociology or ecology, because we are in this kind of interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary world. But I want to say that today I will speak as an artist. So mostly of the things are from a perspective from my perception. So it's really not the truth. It's not about the truth. So the idea is really put also in question what I will share today. So that's why I want to say I will mostly talk from my experience and the experience who I get when I work in a collective way. And the second thing is Spanish is my mother tongue. So sorry if my English is not clear. You can ask at any time also if something is no, I don't know, confusing. So I will share now a short presentation. One second. Yeah. Okay, I think you can see right now, right? The presentation. Yeah, perfect. So Okay, this project is part of a kind of long project I call La Revolución Desindustrial. Somehow, it's a kind of course, I play with the idea of industrial revolution, but now I call this industrial revolution in order to ask ourselves also if the industrial era, if we are agree with this kind of conditions of working, conditions of life, and that's why I call this llamada abierta. It's a kind of open call in order to talk, in order to discuss, in order to exchange what we think about this in a collective way. Because, and now I will start in a very, let's say, biographical way, maybe, in order to really open more and more what is my connection with the industry. I will start with the story of my village or town in Chile. In the south of Chile, I grew up in a place called Lota or Lota in the native language, which is mean little town. So in this place, Lota, they built from the last 19th century a coal mine production. So after 150 years, the government from Santiago de Chile, from the capital, they decide to shut down the mine. So in the 97, a group of miners and families, we joined a strike and we make a huge protest in the street of the capital of Chile, in Santiago. And what I like from this image is the message in the sign is called El Presente, the present. And for me, actually, that's the question. Because usually when governments or the state shut down a mine, something happened that many people start to have a nostalgia about the past. Like in the past, when the coal mine was here, active, we have this kind of job, this kind of social fabric, this kind of life. But also the industrialization have a lot of issues. I really understand that from a political view, of course, especially in these kind of places, the idea of class is very strong. Actually, in this town, a lot of the communist and the socialist movement was very strong at the time from the beginning. But for me, that's not enough in order to really defend that kind of story. But it's true somehow when the deindustrialization happened, of course, a lot of things are broken also. And the idea of solidarity between people as a class, in this case, is workers and working family. Of course, something is broken, you can feel it. And actually, in the next images, I will show how this kind of post-industrial phenomenon also transform not only Latin America, this kind of connection between people and land, but also in some part of Europe and that I visit. So with the time, I start to, as I grow up in a post-industrial town, because in 97, I was 10 years old, my connection with this industry was totally, let's say, in a kind of ruin. I really live in between ruins. Actually, they call the Detroit of Chile, which somehow also is connected with other places which I visit, that usually the post-industrial zones in different countries, they call the Detroit of the country. So in the beginning, when I study art, I start to make a question about how we can represent this issue, and somehow to just visit the place, to visit these ruins and walking around, and somehow became more and more important in the process of research or artistic research, because already all the story around these places is so strong that somehow it's already there, everything. But in order to share that experience, to be there, I start to collect the coal from the walls, the traces, coal waste and traces from the floor, and I start to just travel around these post-industrial places. This work is from 2010. And as you can see, the exercise was super simple. I went there with a paper. I collect some coal waste around that, and I start to make a kind of frottage rubbing on the walls, sometimes from different surfaces. In the picture, for example, you can see that some mines are very precarious. Many people die in the past, actually. So in fact, I start to connect with the energy, let's say, of the place. Like also my body start to have conscious about the history of the rocks there, of the plants there. So the connection with the coal was not directly, but somehow with the environment around that. In 2012, I study in a master program in Switzerland, also in a small town. It's called Sierre. It's in the south of Switzerland, in the Canton de Valais. And during that master, I start to research other coal towns, but now in Europe. So I visit some places in Ariño, Spain, in Charleroi, in Belgium, in Cottbus, in Germany. And during that project, I start to also collect the coal waste. But during the process, I somehow stopped to produce even drawings or even pieces. And I start to writing a lot. Somehow the poetry or short stories start to become more and more important as a medium in order to share that experience. In 2017, I expand this research to Tasmania. By the way, for me, it was super important to see also the difference of these coal towns. For example, the coal mine in Chile is underwater. So somehow the water also is present, the ocean, the Pacific Ocean is present. But the coal mines in Europe and also in Australia, they are open mines. So for me, that's small detail was a big difference. In the picture, you can see a coal mine in Fingal, and yeah, in that point, for me, just was important. Just I don't know, just travel around and just see and experiment with my body what is going on around. So I start to just not collect more coal waste, but to collect more experience and stories and talkings from the people, from the landscape, from the social movements. Because also I realized was a lot of somehow a kind of international I don't know, synchronization around strikes from the miners against the state, against the governments for more rights. But then the green movement also start to make question about if it's sustainable, the coal production. So the problem became more and more bigger in terms of topics like, okay, this is art or it's no art, or when became art is when I share this, but I will share in which way. And the other question was also, why should I tell just for myself about these stories? Why don't make in a collective way this question? The result of this is 2 books. And in these 2 books, I by poems and these short stories I mentioned before, I somehow I share this experience to the audience in a book. But with the time, the idea of make this question in a collective way became more and more important. And in Chile, with a group of friends, we produced an encounter, Arte y Desindustrialización. The encounter started in 2018, and actually this year is the last edition with the pandemic in between. And during these years, we produced 2 books. One book was based in Lota, actually, in this coal town. And the second book was based in Tomé. It's a textile industry, which also was closed. And during the encounter, the idea was just to meet there. We start to invite friends or researchers, people from the academy, people from independent institutions. And the idea was to be 1 week in Chile in these places, eat together, working together in the city, and exchange our research around. The result of these 2 books are in Spanish and English. So actually, in the end of this presentation, I will share with you all the links. Actually, Francisco, he was part of one seminar. And also when we produce the book, also we're thinking about how we can share these seminars. Some of their texts are literally essays, but other ones are poems, manifests. So are different kind of texts also inside the book. As Francisco said in the beginning, I am part of GICAS. GICAS have a kind of network around the world. And in my case, I am part of GICAS Latin America. Right now, we are a group of between 7 and 10 people, mostly Latin Americans, but we are a kind of diaspora. All of us are in different parts of the world right now. Actually, I am in Istanbul, in Turkey, and during the process, we produce some also publications, and this publication, Prácticas Artísticas hacia la Desindustrialización, our collective research was specifically about the railway, about the train in Latin America as an important machine with all this idea of modernism and progress. And so also this publication is in Spanish and English, so also I will share the link. And during also 1 week, we also exchange our experiences from Puerto Rico, Venezuela, Ecuador, Uruguay, Argentina, Chile, Mexico. And somehow the train was just a kind of excuse in order to talk about many topics, was the same in the encounter, actually. Like, the industrialization is not disconnected with other issues around. As I say in the beginning, of course, the idea of how the social fabric is broken, but also the practices of industrialization in the last century also is in question right now. For example, it's very clear in these towns how the idea of verticality or even machismo, the idea of patriarchal system is really, really clear in this kind of environments. So actually, when we open the discussion about industrialization and disindustrialization, some people take it in a negative way, because of course, when you shut down an industry, exists a kind of economical problem there. But in my case, I really see as an opportunity, at least to thinking about these conditions of living, the conditions between landscape and people. Like, we really have the right to explode and to take coal or copper or any material from the earth. I am not sure if just the nostalgia about this past is enough for really make a kind of defense about these industries, let's say. Right now, as I say, I am in Istanbul, and this research will start in a very personal way, and as I say, with the time, I realized to make more a collective. The discussion is super important, because just thinking just one person, I think, is not enough about this huge issue, and also because I think when we collectivize, the conversation became more and more rich. Also, the alternatives. Also, I start to expand the idea of industrialization in other, let's say, frames. And for example, in the photo, you can see a huge crucero in Galata port. It's just here in Istanbul. So the question about industrialization right now in this new context for me is also about tourism, how the touristic industry also affect the landscape in this case here. So somehow this research about industrialization became more and more complex. That's why also in the program, we can talk also in more details in the end of this presentation. The question is also about how the industrialization as a concept, as a frame, start to expand, especially in culture, in other ways. For example, the creative industries, or is also the cultural industries, is really part of our life right now as an artist. So somehow the industrialization is not just there in these materials, but also is in connection with our food, for example, with our clothes. Exists a kind of really, really rich discussion right now, and in contemporary art, you can see even constantly these topics, actually. So right now, in the end of this first part of the presentation, I want to share with you some questions, because I am really, really curious about what you're thinking about this. The first question, who became more and more important in the last years for me, and with the people with who I opened this idea, is it possible to continue producing artistic objects in an environment of industrial overproduction? Like, how is possible to continue make art as an object if we are really surrounded of many and many and so much objects around us? So this is one question who I want to open. And the second question was actually in the title of this seminar today is how to deindustrialize ourselves and our practice. But as I say in the beginning, maybe for some people is the right to industrialize the art and the life. So as I say in the beginning, I really talk as an artist. I don't talk as a sociologist or anthropologist. So the idea is really to thinking if the industrialization is an opportunity to really thinking about what is ongoing around. And because I am really not sure if it's really possible to separate art and life, which is also a very huge topic in art. And I think especially the social movements contribute a lot in these kind of questions also. I will stop to share. So I don't know, this is an invitation to thinking about, we have minutes. I am really curious. What do you think to really open this conversation? Also, if you have some experience from projects you want to share. This is just the first session. We have 3 more. You are also free to join in the next meetings. The next ones, we will exchange also different kind of dimensions about this topic. So yeah, that's it. I don't know.
Thanks so much, Eduardo.
Mm-hmm.
That's also really interesting to hear what, in terms of everybody's different practices they've experienced. There was so much what you talked about that got me thinking about certain things in terms of this idea of, you know, this sort of contradiction between like, well, the industrial period came with, you know, exploitation. You said lots of people died in these mines and what have you. And then obviously when the government decided to deindustrialize your town, was it Lota, your town? Then, you know, then there are sort of protests against that as well, and sort of this nostalgia, retroactive nostalgia, precisely because it's gone. And I kind of feel like I've noticed in my field that there is a changing dimension in capitalism. Obviously, people talk about like the 4th industrial revolution or whatever, and that some people think it's not capitalism anymore, some kind of new neo-feudalism or things, as you say, like we have industrialization less in kind of like more material and obvious ways, but more in sort of service industry and often, you know, things like the arts and stuff. So I think it is like very obviously still capitalism, but it's just different. But what has happened, I think, is you know, this new, whatever we're experiencing at the moment comes with it, you know, quite a lot of kind of ideological cover stories that are quite unpleasant and frustrating. And what can happen is you retroactively look to an old version of capitalism in the 20th century before the sort of tech revolution that we're seeing at the moment, and think kind of like, well, it was better then, and maybe I would have been able to do better art then. And even before that, people looking back at periods of times before capitalism where you might have, you know, under feudalism, you might have like a very few people got to do art, but if you did, you might have a patron, or you might have these sort of aristocrats who would fund your art, or what have you. Obviously, it was, you know, very unlikely that that would happen. But I do kind of notice that at the moment, and I feel like part of the discussion is what are the conditions today? Because I feel like it's so new, you know, things are changing, and kind of getting a hold on, you know, the kind of capitalist conditions of our artistic practices today, which is important to like analyze and criticize, but also at the same time not falling into the trap of just being like, well, let's just go back to the way, well, we can't go back to the way things were. But I do notice a sort of nostalgia, even in myself, for like, well, the free market was better, even though it's still a free market. But I mean, it was never free market, but we now have a sort of slightly different version of a free market.
Thank you very much. And yeah, I think also it's important, I don't know, to make difference also. I am from Latin America. So also I noticed that, for example, the industrialization as a historical layer is really connected with the modernization of the nations in Latin America, because it's really in the same time when many countries have independence from Spain. So somehow when Latin American countries talk about the past, they really talk with a kind of, this is the beginning of our republics, let's say. But in Europe, I really find like industrialization is just another layer of layers and layers and layers behind. So the discussion is totally different, but in Latin America, because of course the colonial also education we have, it's really different, the perception about this historical layer there, which is connected with all the also the concepts you just mentioned. So I think somehow this idea of new words that they think they teach us is really also affect this idea of nostalgia about this recently progress, but in fact they erase all the previous layers and alternatives from pre-Columbus native people who are now in question again. Yeah.
Super interesting, yeah. Does anybody have any thoughts or questions?
I think from my perspective in the UK, it's quite hard to imagine a non-industrial life. Like I'm not really sure. Like I do understand what the Industrial Revolution was, but yeah, maybe as Helen said, like it seems pretty much impossible to go back. So then to deindustrialize one's art practice, does that mean something like buying some land somewhere, or somehow collectively getting together with people to buy some land and living? It almost feels like to deindustrialize your art practice would just be not to have one. It would be to have a kind of a more folk existence, and professional art wouldn't really exist. You would just be sharing songs and living together, I suppose. Like that point about separation between art and life, maybe there just wouldn't be one.
Yeah, that's super interesting, because as it's very easy sometimes to like not be political enough in a way to just sort of like imagine that it's possible to avoid industrialization or capitalism or whatever, because just because we see it as wrong, but it is just the air we breathe. It's everywhere, and often when we think that we're avoiding it, we're just actually expanding the dimensions of capitalism, or like adding a layer, to borrow Eduardo's word, of like disguising what's going on, or to imagine that we can be an exception. So it's interesting to kind of think politically about what the industrial dynamics are today, and how, if it's ever possible to avoid, because it's like, can we just avoid them, recognize them and avoid them? Or does the avoiding them, because sometimes I think this, even with, something like GCAS, we've got to be really careful that we don't just create a new version of a kind of like capitalism of volunteerism or something like that, so, but yeah, I guess this is like a perpetual open question, right? Like that we have to keep thinking about it, because if we don't think about it, we could just end up repeating or creating something new in our attempts to escape it. Maybe that's just a random thought, but
yeah, maybe it would be something like sort of a lower scale. Maybe that's part of the point about industrialization, is the scale of production versus a more smaller scale domestic.
I'd love to also hear, Devinder, about you were saying about the perverse incentives that exist in places like the UK and Europe. We have something often in the arts that looks like it's not like the American capitalist model, because we have grants and stuff. But that also, of course, again, is tied to capitalism, because everything is, and it can generate, in my experience, I think you mentioned the like phrase perverse incentives. Have you experienced that yourself?
Yeah, I think I would. Yeah, it's hard to. I don't want to generalize too much, because my experience is kind of like a couple of years in the Scottish art scene, in kind of publicly funded what are called artist run spaces. So it's a committee of volunteers who run a gallery basically and do the programming and curation and receive a budget from essentially the Scottish government through Creative Scotland, which used to be Arts Council Scotland. Yeah, so to have one funder, which is the government, and to be, I don't know, the institution I was in, it's got like a 30-year history and kind of was the model that a lot of artisan spaces copied. It's called Transmission Gallery. And it was kind of set up as a collective, communal run thing. And there was a lot more sort of state benefits at the time. So you could be basically unemployed, work for free in the gallery and be pretty autonomous and independent. And you wouldn't need to, the idea behind it was that graduates essentially from art schools, even then it was kind of art school focused, that weren't getting into big shows and didn't have many opportunities, could do things themselves. And that was possible a little bit more in the 80s. But now those kind of like that more kind of generally accessible layer of money at a kind of citizen level is gone. So then being in a model where you're reliant on grants from one funder means that the government's agenda for the day is sort of in play. So a lot of equality, diversity initiatives, which obviously are or can be a good thing, but can maybe sometimes not be. Maybe I'm trying to avoid the word woke, but yeah, so I don't know. I'm not sure how much I really want to go into it. Like, a lot of very strange, contradictory things came up through that process.
Absolutely, because I mean, I recognize this fully, and as you say, like this diversity, these are good intentions, but when it's weaponized, again, this is the question of not understanding that it's still capitalism often, or using it as a cover story. So then, you have to play into sort of identity categories, which again is not really, maybe art is looking for something more political and universal than sort of auto branding or whatever. So it becomes, it becomes these governments tied to capital who often basically sell out to capital, don't protect us from the ravages of capitalism. They, maybe might have done a little bit more in the 80s, as you say, when there was more, state benefits and stuff like that. Basically using a lot of these artistic outlets as a sort of cover story, a feel-good cover story to paper over the sort of neoliberal ideology that's existing elsewhere. And it's quite, and then as you say, maybe you have to steer your own artistic practices to these criteria, which again is a form of, industrialization in a sense, is sort of like, making a product in a way. And even though it seems like it's not a product because it's state funded, or that sounds more socialistic, but actually it's sort of more of a kind of like second degree industrialization in a way.
Yeah, it did feel more propagandistic as well, maybe than just a privately run thing would.
Definitely, so interesting. I mean, because that's the experience from like the UK, I guess. And is that something that people in other countries recognize, or? I mean, I guess America would be quite different these days. I know Sarah works in a university, which might have some crossover.
Yeah, I'm trying to think about how my experience relates. So I feel like I'm, I never try to think of like I've found a pure approach to it. Like I am trying to find a way to get across ideas that are the idea that I want. And you're right, like Devinder, like we often have to, like in our grants, we have to, have some like cultural sustained pedagogy, or like there has to be some kind of relationship to a particular ethnic group, or like kind of group that like that's how the funding trends go, which, like you said, can be good, and it can have a negative side to it where you kind of feel like you're doing some kind of propaganda. But we are in like a really weird position where I'm an artist that works in a educational game design lab that is mostly funded through NSF, so the National Science Foundation. So what I've done as an artist is kind of gone into a group that isn't really about art at all. It's about education. It's about science education. And then what I do is I just do art within this context, kind of almost, that's like the most subversive thing. So I think about American movements and art in education, like Mr. Rogers or Sesame Street. Here you have these like puppeteers who are these kind of wild artists who like get funded through state education initiatives, but are somehow able to maintain these like kind of weird like identities as artists, which I find compelling, like some of those artists. So that's kind of the tradition that I'm currently working in with that work. And then I also do like fiber arts and textile arts, and that I focus on, like, I mostly do communications over that through Instagram, but I find it would be impossible to sell a piece of that work and be sustainable. Like I see people trying to do it, and I think there's just no way forward, because the impact it would have on my body would just be immense, like the time per hour, whatever product. So I haven't thought about a way to like make money that way, other than it's a platform for writing and building community. So yeah, I'm kind of like, I like, Eduardo, how you talked about like your body. Like I just kind of go with what feels right and try to stay really kind of both political in the way I can get my head around it, and these education opportunities provide that. I'm lucky that I think, part of a government grant funded thing, because it provides me with like healthcare and kind of some of those things that most artists don't have.
Definitely. It's
I think
interesting.
it requires an incredible amount of creativity to find a way forward. And then I appreciate the director that I work with, who's also my spouse, because he spends his life energy raising money for us. And I always tell people that like these grants, they require less accountability than you think. So take the money and do everything you can with it as an artist. Like, don't get caught up with something that you think like, oh, I have to be faithful to like the letter of the law of this grant. Like, once you have the money, like try to do art. That's kind of how I kind of encourage our artists.
That's awesome. I really like what you're saying, Sarah, about, this, it feels like, maybe 10 or so years ago, when, more at the sort of like beginnings of the fourth industrial revolution, whatever you want to call it, in terms of like platform capitalism. And there was this like real promise about social media and being self-employed and freelance and generating your own money by, selling your things on Etsy or via social media or whatever. And obviously, even things like Patreon, and that you see these examples of people that it works for, but actually this is a huge amount of, the cover story. I mean, it's the Uberization, right? The cover story of like, you can have your freedom and you can do what you want and you can do it small scale. And this is, somehow more authentic. But actually the level of, as you say, how impossible that is, and the level of exploitation that happens, auto exploitation, because you're doing it, via, you're self-employed and you're having to do all your promotion via social media, that this new, I mean, it's not that new anymore, but I think we're all kind of seeing through it. But the promise of the freedom that these tech platforms were supposed to give us is like obviously kind of hollow.
Yeah, absolutely. I was playing a game with my daughter. It's called Buy the Rights. It's like a film game. It's like a little card game, and you're given 4 prompts, and then you have to pitch a game to, a film to someone. And 2 of her pitches was dysfunctional and an unpaid intern. And I said, well, what's dysfunctional about this character? And she said, well, they're an unpaid intern. And she said it without any, like, she didn't know she was making a joke. But I think that like social media is the ultimate kind of community of unpaid interns, right? So we're making all this money every time we post for this other, group of people, and the group of people includes influencers or, like these ad like people making money off of advertisements or the companies themselves. And so I think about it all the time when I post, because I'm building a following, but I don't want to, like, every time you're putting your art out there, you're making your art, but then you're also doing the job of promoting the art. And then if you find ways to make money, that's an additional job, which is like writing a book or doing something like doing advertisements. So if you work with like affiliates or groups, like, it is an additional job. So you almost have to hire another person to do that thing. And then you're working as an advertiser, not as an artist. So I'm now at the point with my following that I could start doing affiliates. And I'm like, well, I didn't start this in order to become an advertiser. And I always remind myself, like, I'm here to write. And I do get, I have all these leeches making money off of my work. But, if I can get the ideas out there, that's about all I can hope for, I think, at this point with what this system is offering. There's like a lot of people kind of suggesting that you move towards like owning your own platform. So a lot of people on social media are now saying, like, have your own website, your own newsletter, which, I mean, that might be a better way, I think, for some people, but I don't know. It's still an extra job. Then you have to like have a website, and then you're paying Squarespace or someone else.
Yeah. And I guess it's just so important to like be able to just even identify the dynamics, because it's so easy to forget. Like when you're scrolling on Instagram, you're both the customer and the exploited party, and you're being kind of like hypnotized, and this is the free time that you have. You're sort of going into this sort of meditative state where maybe you're relaxing a bit, but also getting like hypnotically advertised to, and maybe you'll emerge out of it a better employee because you haven't spent your time doing something nice like partying or using up your own energy. I don't know, it seems like it's like a numbing device, an exploiting device, and horrible.
Yeah, I agree. I think like what you just said about like reflecting on the nature of it, it changes your relationship to it. And I think it's like, if you enjoy Instagram or social media, like, no judgment, like it's fine, but just like the more you think about what it is, like, it'll just change your relationship. And for me, like, I used to scroll more. Now I only produce, so now I'm like making them more money, which is disturbing on a different level. So I don't know if like my reflection on that will continue generating some new activity. Maybe it'll just make me a worse. I don't know.
Can I just say one more thing, because Sarah's reminded me of it, which is the perverse incentives mainly is kind of peer competition. That was kind of I think what I was thinking. So yeah, that I was experiencing.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah, I was thinking just in a similar way about some of the question that Eduardo proposed, that I think that relates with a lot of the things that you were saying. Like, for example, this idea of thinking this process like a new opportunity or possibility, but thinking what are the conditions to being able to think about that? Like, what are the material conditions that someone needs to have the possibility of actually think about their own reality, their own possibilities? And I think with that, the industrialization now, for me, in a way, has to do a lot more with the logic and the relations that industrialization proposed that the actual production, because I don't know, the creation of products has been always present in humanity in different ways. But the logic that the industrialization puts in things, like this thing that it's, I don't know, it's kind of difficult to talk about a product because it has all these negative aspects added to it, or work. Like, because it's funny that work, like this idea that work is something good and dignified for people, it's common to capitalism, Christianity, and Marxism in the traditional way. Like these three main paradigms, they all go for no, you have to exploit yourself through work because that is going to redeem yourself. Or the logic that, for example, mass production in the industrial age, it's like a collective production or a production in mass, and that, I think, in a lateral way, reinforce the logic that artistic production is individual. Like, because you have mass production, so the artistic production should be different in a way, so it has to came from one artist or an individual genius in, I don't know, a couple of centuries ago. And I think that type of logic is the most complicated to deindustrialize, because we think in those terms and we have that history that work is kind of bad or complicated, or production is complicated. But I think it has to do with the logic of production. And in that terms, with the question that Eduardo was saying, like the possibility, or it is possible to keep doing art products in this world with overproduction, I would ask maybe, like, maybe the problem is not the possibility, because I think that the only way of changing things is with new possibilities. But what for? We need to keep doing these different products, and also make the question about what type of products are the ones that are overproduced now. With which type, with characteristic, these products that fill the world now, they have, and in relation with that, maybe think what is the particularity of artistic production that could be different in the process of the production, in the logic of that production, but also the relation that the product can have with, I don't know if call it an audience, but the connection that that product can make, not trying not to think in general terms, assuming, has it's been shown in the discussion, that each country, each region have different experience in this kind of relation. So each artistic object, it's going to have different relations depending on the context too. So yeah, I was just thinking in that kind of things in relation with the things that you were saying, and Eduardo.
I think that's so interesting what you're saying, Pancho, about, yeah, I mean, our kind of ideological perspective, and, you know, the question of what work is, and that maybe, yeah, what separates ideologically, like, art of value is this work of genius, but that's quote unquote, you know, the genius. Obviously, you know, we live in like a network of people, we live in a whole context, and, you know, the capitalist ideology individualizes and gets us to avoid looking at our context. And this is something that is, you know, the question of, my sister works in the fashion world, and the question of the genius creative director is just absolutely hilarious, you know. And in film, this is a, you know, we have a real, like, it is the key ideological issue. It's completely irrational. And these are, you know, films are made so collectively with so many people, and it is absolutely not ever a work of genius. But it is just amazing how it's so hard to step outside that logic. And I think one of the ways to do that is to look at the context, is to look at the political economies, to understand, you know, that capitalism maybe casts our gaze away from that towards this sort of like magical individualistic thinking. And and in art, which maybe at its you know, at its best, it is, you know, something that helps us reflect on the world in which we live. So there's sort of an antagonism whereby in the art world, we're so imbued with this idea of individuality and genius, and, you know, avoiding our social context. But like, if art is to do art, it's to look at our social context.
Yeah. Also, I think, yeah, it's, as you say, we are also in a contradiction, in a constantly contradiction, and of course, art also is part of that. Like sometimes also we are part of project, also we criticize, or sometimes we criticize something, but we show in a way where the institution have issues with that. So it's a thing, is a constantly thing, very, very, very complex in terms of how to make a difference between, as you say, like, okay, if I stop to produce objects, how my art piece, let's say, became a kind of service. Like, okay, I will share this kind of experience, like in a performative way or in an immaterial way. So somehow is I don't want to say like we don't have escape, because probably it's the most easy way when the conversation came in this level. But this, I think, for me, the important thing at least is to have conscious about that contradiction. Like as also some people say, also when we apply from some I don't know, budget to apply from some, I don't know, applications, the idea of also to competition, in this case of precarity. I think it's at least, and I think this is the opportunity, at least in these seminars, is also how to put, at least in discussion, that kind of complexity and the different dimensions. And I am so happy also to listen how other disciplines, I don't know, discuss about. Because, for example, as I am part of visual art, I really share what already many people from visual art start to discuss. It's not, it's the not just the form as well, itself. It's also about the conditions of to produce that kind of image, that kind of object, artistic object. And actually, in the next sessions next week, we will talk even about the keywords, which concept we use when we talk about art, because also it's a huge question right now. When you listen some artists, they have a kind of list of keywords when they talk also about their works. So somehow also that kind of aspect, I think, is also very important to discuss when we talk about these contradictions, because of course any concept is a kind of frame, an ideological frame, when we talk about ecologies or feminism, or in our artistic project, is what do you mean when we talk about that things? Or when we talk about solidarity, for example, the concept solidarity became very, very important, especially in Latin American art, when art is talking about that. But what is the conditions for make an art piece in that frame of solidarity, for example? So I don't know, I think in the next session, keep in mind, like, we were also talking about that, about which word we use when we talk about these discussions. So in order to really explore also the different perspective. So yeah.
It's awesome. Yeah, it's so important, because it's important to reflect upon, you know, what we actually mean, you know, and these sort of received wisdom kind of phrases and stuff can lead us to avoid confronting the reality in which we're actually producing our work. Thanks so much, Eduardo. That was awesome. And yeah, I hope next week we can continue discussing in a similar way. It's really interesting discussion you led us into.
Yes, I want to add something more that I just share with you in the chat, but in the email we can share again a kind of path where we can just, in a very free way, we can start to write references of, if you want to share some links, and so on. I just add the links of the books I just show in the presentation. So this path, you don't need a password or anything. You just can't add information there. So feel free also to use it and share.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So yeah, I mean, we're at an hour, and we should probably save, you know, more ideas and more time to discuss next week. But thanks so much, everybody, for coming on your afternoon/morning, wherever you are. And yeah, really looking forward to getting to know you a bit more as the weeks go by.
Thanks. This is great.
So thank you so much, Eduardo.
Thank you.
And yeah,
Yeah,
are you good
thank you.
to, you know how to like end the recording, Pancho, right?
Thank you. Gracias.
Yes, I will now. Stop recording.
Ciao, ciao.